All right, it is 12 o'clock, so we should get started. Welcome to the Oqtane Community Standup. This is the second community stand-up that we had. We kicked it off last month as a more sort of public meeting that anyone can participate in. I guess as I mentioned last month, the goal behind these meetings is just to share more information about what's happening with the Oqtane product, the roadmap, and any new features that are being introduced into the platform. And these meetings are being recorded, and they are all going to be published to the Oqtane channel that's on YouTube. Last month's meeting was already published there, and this one will be published as well. The agenda for today is we'll talk a bit about the recent releases that Oqtane has published. We will also share some updates about modules and themes that are separate, of course, from the Oqtane framework, but also had any updates. I'll touch briefly on the marketplace, and then we'll have some time at the end for discussion Q&A. The chat should be open in this Teams meeting, so if anyone has questions, they can submit them through the chat. So in terms of project activity, I guess I wanted to lead off because I am a member of the project committee for the .NET Foundation. I've been a volunteer within the .NET Foundation for more than 10 years now, and very active within, I guess, the project committee for at least the last 5 years. And so I publish monthly statistics about the activity of open source projects that are part of the foundation. I guess one of the things that people look at when they look at open source projects is how active are they? How many contributions are being made? Is the project being actively maintained? Is it being enhanced? Is it moving forward? I guess I was quite happy to see that for the month of September, Oqtane was actually the most active community project that was part of the foundation. So it had the most pull requests in the month of September and the most commits. So very active month for Oqtane, and that'll be represented in the next couple of slides in terms of the releases. So we actually had 2 releases in September. So right at the beginning of September, we had the Oqtane 6.2 release, which was a major release. And I talked a bit about 6.2 in our last community stand-up about some of the features that were being included, and I'll actually demonstrate some of those today. So that release, we had 57 pull requests. We had 126 commits, and those were contributed by 4 different contributors who are all listed here on this slide. After that release, of course, work continued on. Some of the enhancements that had been introduced in 6.2 needed further refinement. There was, always things that need to be done with an open source project. And so 6.2.1 was released earlier this week on September the 29th. That was on Monday. That release had 65 pull requests, 131 commits, and there were 6 different folks that contributed at the various aspects to that release. And those folks are listed on this slide as well. So very active month with 2 releases. Generally, we don't have 2 releases in a month. Usually we've sort of stuck with a 1 release a month cadence, but in this particular case, there were some items that were part of the new Oqtane application template that I wanted to ensure that the community got the best overall experience with. And it was a bit of a learning experience in creating the template. And so it was important to put out a new, like a revised version of that template sooner rather than later so that it could have all of the latest fixes in an official form for the community. So the highlights of these releases were we updated the Oqtane framework to .NET 9.09, which is the latest SDK version of .NET. We introduced the Radzin text editor. And so I covered this in the last community stand-up and even did, I think, a demonstration of what that Radzin text editor is capable of. And after the meeting, there was some further discussion about the fact that it was quite a bit more beneficial from a user perspective than the Quill.js default editor that we had been using in the past. And so initially I wasn't keen on introducing another dependency into the framework. But I think that the value and the benefit of this particular text editor far kind of outweigh the addition of additional dependency. And so I decided to add Radzin to the actual framework itself instead of keeping it as a separate like module that someone would have to install. And in fact, made it the new default. So if you're creating a new installation of Oqtane, the Radzin text editor will be the default editor. For those people who are upgrading to the latest version of Oqtane, the site settings has the option in it in the functionality area where you can switch from Quill.js to the Radzin editor if that's what you would like to do. And of course, for those people who don't want to use Radzin, if they preferred the old functionality, again, they can go into the site settings and they can change it from Radzin back to Quill.js if that's what they would like to do. Another capability that was added in the month of September was around setting management. The setting area of Oqtane was always designed to be an extensible area, meaning you could use it to store information related to different types of entities. The core framework uses it for storing information related to sites and pages and modules and users and every type of entity that's part of the core framework. However, it's also possible to use the setting API to store information related to custom entities. So if you're building a custom module, you can store the settings for your custom module there. And in the past, there was only an API that was available to work with it, but a new user interface was added as part of the admin dashboard, which allows you to view and edit the settings, and I'll show that in a subsequent demo. And then taking advantage of the setting management capability, there was an integration done so that settings can now be used as part of the user profile. So user profiles, you can set up the various fields that are part of a user profile. And in some cases, your fields might include items which include a list of options. There was always the ability to hard code sort of a list of options that would be available in a drop-down that a user could select from. But if you had a very large list of options, it was a bit cumbersome to do it in that form. And so tying it in with settings made a lot of sense, and I'll explain that when I do the demo. Migrations are, something that you need to take advantage of when you're migrating from one version to another, either of the core framework or of modules. And of course, this is migrations are typically tied to the EF core data access capability that's part of .NET. Most developers understand the fact that there's a table that exists in the database called __ EF migrations history that keeps track of all of the prior migrations that have ever been run in your system. And that table is typically kind of hidden away, and only folks who have access to the database can get access to it. In some cases, that information is very valuable in terms of being able to diagnose issues, to be able to see if a specific migration was run, when it was run. And so a new capability was added to the system info in Oqtane so that that information can be surfaced through the user interface, and you can quickly review that to find any information that you might need about migrations. Oqtane also supports external login capability. In particular, it supports OAuth2 and OIDC. And OIDC has a lot of capabilities and a lot of different configuration options that are part of it. So Oqtane's added a lot of different capabilities over time around OIDC, but one thing that it did not have was integration with this concept called single logout, sometimes using the acronym SLO, which is a capability where if you're using OIDC for login, of course, you're logging in on using an external identity provider, and then it'll, of course, log you into the Oqtane application as well. Previously, when you logged out of the Oqtane application, it would remove your cookie, but it wouldn't remove the cookie from the identity provider. And in fact, you don't always want to do that. So that's why this is an option that you can opt into if that's the behavior that you want. And I'll show you how to do that in the demo that we're going to do. Module and theme management are sort of integrated parts of the Oqtane framework, and then they allow you to discover additional capabilities that you can easily install into your application. One of the sort of confusing parts about that is if you had already installed a module or a theme, then it wouldn't appear in the user interface where you're browsing the various extensions that are available. And so that was an enhancement request which was submitted so that every available extension can be displayed, and now it indicates whether or not they're installed. So I can show that. And then module message is just a component that module developers can take advantage of to display a message within their module when a user takes various types of actions. So the Oqtane framework uses this within the administrative UI. Typically, the module message by default is displayed at the top of the module. And that could be an error message or just a confirmation message or maybe a validation message to tell the user that they need to do something different. There was a request that in some cases, rather than displaying an alert message sort of at the top of the module in the page, it might be better to display it as a toast, which is a message that appears on the screen for a short period of time and then disappears, usually at the bottom kind of right of the screen. And so module message toast support was added as well, and I can show you that. I guess I'm going to also just reiterate that a little bit of information about the Oqtane application template, because it was the major feature that was introduced in Oqtane 6.2. And the background to it was that although Oqtane's been around for a long time now, 5 or 6 years, in the past, most of the effort was on ensuring that everything was built in a very modular fashion. So when you wanted to build custom extensions for Oqtane, you would build them as a separate, isolated module or theme. And there was a lot of benefits to that approach. And that approach also facilitates the concept of the Oqtane marketplace, where people can share extensions with others and they're easy to install. But there's a whole other subset of users that utilize Oqtane that are simply building their own custom application for their own purposes within their own business. And in that case, it's not so important to keep everything so isolated from one another. You might want to build an Oqtane application project that contains, multiple modules, a theme, site migrations, like a bunch of different extensibility points all wrapped up into the same application. And by doing it in a single application, simplifies the development story, the debugging story, and the publishing or deployment story. And so some research was done to determine whether or not Oqtane could support this approach of creating an application. And I'm happy, I guess, that this experiment worked. And so some of the benefits are that it provides like a quick installation of the Oqtane application into a development environment. So much more simple approach to get up and running than what we've had traditionally. Much better .NET tooling support. So I'm talking about within Visual Studio or within the .NET CLI. You can basically pull in NuGet dependencies in the traditional way that you're used to when you're building .NET or Blazor applications. There's no sort of extra knowledge that you need to have or extra work that you need to do. You can just utilize standard NuGet dependencies. You can also utilize the static asset support that's part of .NET. And this provides a much simplified deployment story as well. You can just use the standard .NET publishing capabilities that are part of Visual Studio or other tools to basically, build a published artifact that can be published to a folder or to an environment. And it was important that this new capability also allows developers to leverage all of the existing Oqtane capabilities that currently exist, and I'm happy to say that it does. And it still preserves separation between the application that you're building and the framework. And I mean, this is a fundamental requirement in Oqtane. Like, we don't, of course, want people to be modifying the code of the open source framework itself, right? You should be using it as a library to provide enhanced functionality to your application. And so there still has to be that separation between the application and the framework. And in this case, I'm talking about the Oqtane framework. And this approach still allows for that. And the new capabilities needed to be added in a backward compatible manner so that they were still compatible with any of the approaches that developers had been using in the past. And in fact, so for those developers who are building, shareable extensions that they want to publish in the Oqtane marketplace, they can still continue to use the old methodology. It works completely fine. But now we have a new capability as well with the Oqtane application template. So I mean, it's very simple to utilize the Oqtane application template. You just need to use the .NET CLI to install it. And so with a command line, and if you had installed the Oqtane application template for version 6.2 that was released early this month, and you want to take advantage of the latest application template, then you would need to do a .NET New uninstall to remove the old version, and then a .NET New install to install the new version. And then once, of course, you have the template installed, you can use .NET New to actually create an application based on the template. And you can create as many applications as you want based on the Oqtane application template. In terms of updates to modules, the Oqtane blog module had a major update as part of 6.2. The Oqtane blog is an example, I guess, module that is in the Oqtane repo. Like, it's in a separate repo from the Oqtane framework itself. But it's a good example of, how to build a module using a lot of the different capabilities that Oqtane has to offer. So there's a new version that was created, 6.2, and the main focus around that version was to take advantage of the new capabilities that were added as part of Oqtane 6.2. And specifically, this was more related to like using the standardized approach around NuGet and NuSpec definition. So the three major changes are that when you install the blog module, it actually is going to install it into the www.root/_content/Oqtane blogs folder. And so this is the standard location where NuGet packages, like any other NuGet package, is installed as well. And in the past, Oqtane installed modules in a custom sort of location and didn't follow the standards of NuGet completely. And so by following the standards, it allows for some new capabilities for modules to be installed. The other aspect is that static assets. So these would be like things like CSS files, JavaScript files, or images that are part of a module need to be packaged into the NuGet package in a specific folder called static web assets. And again, this is a NuGet standard that all NuGet packages for .NET follow, but Oqtane was not following it in the past. And so the Oqtane blog module has now adopted this approach to follow the standards more precisely. And then the last thing is that there's a metadata node that's part of the NuSpec file called package types. And this is in fact where you should declare the version of a dependency that a module depends on. So in this case, if you have a module and it's dependent upon the Oqtane framework version 6.2, it would be in the package types in that metadata where it should be specified. In the past, Oqtane was actually using the dependencies metadata node as part of the new spec, which is not correct and not the intended usage of the dependencies node. So by changing the packaging of the Oqtane blog module to use this approach, and I guess there's one more bullet that I didn't include here, and that's like any of the references to static assets, which were within the Razor components themselves, now have to point to the /content/Oqtane blogs folder location for the URLs, whereas in the past they were pointing to a different location. And so in the combination of all of these changes now allow the Oqtane blog module to be installed at either build time or runtime. In the past, it was only able to be installed at runtime, and that was the general concept when Oqtane was created, is runtime deployment of modules. But there is an additional benefit of being able to install a module at build time. And that is, if you're using this new Oqtane application approach, you can just simply reference a module by its NuGet package reference within your project file, and it'll extract all of the static assets and assemblies and everything to the appropriate locations. And then when it comes, and so then you can run it and take advantage of that module. And then when you want to publish or deploy your Oqtane application, because it's referenced as a NuGet package reference, it'll automatically pull that module into the overall deployment, and you don't have to install modules separately, right? It'll become part of the overall deployment story. And so this had some benefits. This was last month, I think, in the demonstration that I did. I demonstrated a much more simplistic sort of custom module that I had built, but my hypothetical idea was that, if I wanted to build a site and I wanted to take advantage of the Oqtane blog module, I should just be able to include a NuGet package reference, and it should just work. And so I'll be able to demonstrate to you today as well. Okay, so now we're going to get into some demonstrations. So first thing I'm going to do, I'll open a command window. And that's not what I want to do. I thought I had... So what we'll do is I've already installed the latest template, and so I'm going to create a new application. So .NET New, Oqtane App, output, and then I'm going to just call this new application mycompany.myproject. So by running that, it very quickly spins up a new Oqtane application for me. And if I go and I look in my folder here, here's what it created. And if I open this up, I can open this with Visual Studio, and we can take a look at a few things in here in terms of what it did. And so it created 3 projects for me: client, server, and shared. If we take a look at the client project, we can see that it has various metadata. Some of this metadata in Oqtane 6.2.1 has changed from the original version. And I actually posted a blog earlier today to the Oqtane.org website to explain the differences between the application that's created with the 6.2 template versus 6.2.1. And so I've outlined the changes that are required for you to be able to update your application if you created it with the 6.2 template. Okay, so it's got metadata here. It's got some package references. This is one thing that we had to change in 6.2.1. Is have direct package references to some of the Blazor packages, because in 6.2 some of these were missing, and when they weren't here, in some environments the Visual Studio debugger would not work for some developers. I was never able to reproduce the problem, and a lot of the developers that I know that were using the template in 6.2 didn't encounter the problem, but there were a number of developers who did encounter the problem. So it was a bit of a it was a bit of an effort to try and track down like why it was working in some environments and why it was not working in others. And it eventually came down to these package references need to be explicitly declared. They can't be pulled in through the reference of like through the Oqtane client reference, because this Oqtane client package also contains these references. But they're transient package references at that point. And I guess in order for Visual Studio to pick them up, they need to be direct references. So we've added these now. And then, of course, you've got the package reference to the Oqtane.client 621. If we look at the server project, it's similar. So you've got property group metadata. You've got the package references. You've got the references from the server project to the client and shared projects. And then you've got the reference to the Oqtane server NuGet package. And so one of the things I'll mention about the Oqtane server NuGet package, in 6.2, it did not include static assets. And so because of that, those static assets were duplicated into the Oqtane application in 6.2. In 6.2.1, the static assets are actually included in the Oqtane.server NuGet package, which means they do not have to be included. And if we look at the www root folder, we'll see only the static assets that are necessary for the module, or sorry, for the application that we're building. Whereas in 6.2, you'd have a bunch of other static assets that were listed here that were part of the Oqtane framework itself. And so that's another change. I'll also point out that we've updated the template.json, which is what's utilized by Visual Studio to actually, or the CLI to create the Oqtane application from the template. And we've enhanced it so that it can generate dynamic port numbers for the, basically the non-SSL and SSL website addresses. So these port numbers are dynamically generated when you create your Oqtane application project. This is new as well. It was not working this way in Oqtane 6.2, so this was something that was improved. It also generates new GUIDs as part of the Oqtane solution. Instead of using static GUIDs for each of the projects, it generates dynamic ones. So that was another change that was done. And then we've got a shared project similarly. So with this is all generated, and it automatically sets up the server project as your startup project. And so we'll just go ahead and we will run this now. And it will, pull down all of the package dependencies that are listed as part of these project files as part of the build process. And then it's going to launch a browser using the dynamic port numbers that it came up with when it created the project. All right, so, and we get to the Oqtane installation wizard, which is obviously the first step that you want to go through in order to set up your database. So there's different databases, of course, that we can choose from, but I'll just use the default local DB that it specified. I will create an account. This will be the user account that I'm going to log in with. I want some information to create my initial user. I'm going to go ahead and install now. And what this is going to do is it's going to basically run all the database migrations on this database that it's creating. It's going to create an initial site for me. And so this is the initial site that it created. And I can go ahead and I can log into that site with the account that I created. And so I've got some basic content. I've got all the regular kind of functionality that I would expect. So maybe the first thing I will show you is if I go into edit mode and I go into edit content, we can see that this is the Radzen text editor, um, um, which was included in 6.2, which has, all of the standard sort of rich text editing capabilities that you'd want. Like you can, highlight, and I can do things. I can change like the font to a different font. I can change the size, of various things. I can change the formatting. I can also switch over into the HTML view if I want to, so I can actually see the HTML. I can launch an image editor so that I can actually add an image. So let's say I wanted to maybe upload an image. So I'll browse, maybe I'll just pick a random image that's here. I'll upload that image. It uploaded it, and I'll insert it, and inserted an image into my content, um, which I could then, I guess, save. And that image is now persisted into my content. So this is quite a nice editor. Another feature that was added just in 6.2.1 is if you want to add a link. So let's say I want to highlight some text here, and I'm going to say add link. I can add a web link, so I can put a web address. Or this is the new feature that was added. I can say it's a file link, and I can, choose a file to link it to, and then it'll add the link to the file that was uploaded as well. So a couple different ways you can add links. I can also highlight, of course, and I can remove that link. So it's quite a nice functional editor, and I'll show you how you can control. So you go into the admin dashboard, you go into site settings, and you go into functionality, and this is where the text editor specification is made. So if I wanted to use the Quill editor, I can just specify it here and save. But in fact, I like the I like the Radzen editor much better, so I'm definitely going to leave that. All right, so let's look at something else now. Let's look at setting management. So we can see this new option in the admin dashboard called setting management. If we go in there, it gives you a user interface, and it basically allows me to select from various entities that have been defined that have settings. Right now, I don't have very many, right? I have, let's say, site settings, and I can choose the site number 1, which is this site that it generated, and I can see there's only like one setting that's been defined in here. If I went back to maybe the site settings page, and I just save here, because there was a lot of default values that were used behind the scenes, and I go back into setting management and I choose site, I can see that there's a lot of settings here now that appear. These settings are set through that site settings UI, or they could be set through custom modules or various things. So this is another great thing about having a setting management area, is you can actually see all of the different settings that are stored in the backend system, regardless of where they're being read or managed from, because they could be actually being referenced from custom modules or even created by custom modules. So a lot of different information that's here. These, of course, are core settings, right? Module, site, user, and there's a lot of other types of core entities. But what if I wanted to create a custom setting? And the idea behind custom settings is that, in a lot of systems, there's the notion of master data. Master data being like static lists of data, like, for example, maybe a list of countries or a list of currencies or a list of languages, or, there's many different types of lists of basically entities that you might want to keep track of in your system. And it seems kind of pointless to have to build like a custom module or a custom database table to store that information, especially if a lot of this information is just simple name value pairs. So I can import a setting in here. So in this case, I'm going to import a whole list of countries. So I have this CSV file, countries.csv. So I'm going to select all of that, and I will basically paste that in here. And we can see the format is, it wants the entity name, the entity ID. If it's a global entity, then the ID is -1. The name of whatever the setting is. In this case, it's going to be the country name, the abbreviation, the value is the full name, and then whether or not this is a private setting. And in this case, these are all public kind of settings. So I say import. It imports all that data. I choose country, and then I choose -1, and I've got my full list of countries now, right? So I've got master data that I can use within my custom modules, right? Like, let's say if I have a custom module that I need the user to be able to select a country. This data all exists now, and I just need to use the setting API to load it and to allow them to choose from the list. And I'll show you now how this has been integrated into the user profile. So if I go into the admin dashboard and I go into profile management, these are the default profile fields that Oqtane provides out of the box. Right, so you got first name, last name, street, city, region, country. Oh, country. Okay. By default, the country field, if we go and look at it, it's a text field, right? It doesn't give you any values you can choose from. It expects the user to actually key in the name of the country that they're from. What if I want to actually have options? Well, I could like try to type out all of the options of the various countries that I want in comma delimited form, but that seems like a waste of time. So instead, I can select settings and I can choose country from the list. And that will then pull all of the settings that were related to this country entity that I just set up. And if I save that now, and I go into my user profile, and I go into profile, I can see that it has the full list of countries that I just imported that I can choose, that the user can choose from. And it displays the display name, and it'll save the code, like the key value, into the oops, yeah, it'll store that into the user's profile. So that's just an example of how settings can be integrated and how you can include all kinds of different master data very easily. So you don't need to build custom modules to, just to maintain master data. You can just use the settings capability to like import all kinds of different master data that would be part of your system. All right, so next thing I want to show you is migration history. So if we go into system info, we've always had, various options that you can see that are part of the system info, but there's a new tab now called migrations. And if I go into migrations, we can see that because Oqtane actually has the ability to have multiple databases that are part of an installation, because it is multi-tenant, you can see that this site that we're in, the data for it is stored in the master database, also known as a tenant. And then these are all of the different migrations that have been run. This information is basically stored in that EF migration history table. And so you can see that it contains, migrations that were run for modules, migrations that were run for the master database, migrations that were run for the tenant database, migrations that were run for this default sort of my module that is part of the project that was scaffolded. And so, yeah. And this is quite handy because like you'll see that these dates are all and versions are all consistent because I just made the installation. But when you have an Oqtane installation that you upgrade over time, you will see, the date that a specific migration was run for each version that is part of the upgrade path, and also which version of Oqtane it was run on. So this information can be quite valuable when you're trying to determine when various things were installed in your system, when different migrations were executed. So again, quite a helpful developer feature. And this feature is only available to host users, because just like the rest of this information that is available in system info is only for host users. All right, another feature related to OIDC single logout. So in Oqtane, you have user management, and you have a settings area, and then you have these different sort of settings that you can define for users. External login settings are where you define either your, OIDC settings or OAuth2 settings. So if we choose OIDC, This is where you would fill out the various information for connecting to an identity provider. That could be, any identity provider that supports OIDC. Um, and here we have the new option, allow single logout. So, and that's basically, it specifies if users should be logged out of both the application and the provider. Um, the default is no, because in a lot of cases, you do not want this feature. You just want the user to log out of your application. You don't want them to be logged out of the provider. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're using like Microsoft Entra, for example, as your OIDC provider for your website. That's great, but if you had enabled allow single logout and it logs you out of the website, but then also logs you out of Entra, it means that you'd be logged out of your email potentially, you'd be logged out of Azure, you'd be logged out of a whole lot of things. And so that's why this feature is not enabled by default. But for those environments where you want your users to be logged out of the identity provider, you can now enable that. All right, so I'm going to close this for a moment, and I'm going to go back to the project that was Scaffold, and we'll go into the server project. And I'm going to add another package reference. So we'll add a package reference here to the octane.blogs module. And it's the latest version we want, 6.2.0. All right. And so just by adding this package reference, and then we're gonna do a build so that it pulls down the Oqtane blogs package, and builds it as part of this project. And then we're gonna, as soon as this is done compiling, we're gonna run. All right. And so just by adding this package reference, it should have basically installed the Oqtane blog module into my environment. So we can figure this out by logging in using the account that I had created earlier. We'll go to this private page. We'll go into our control panel, and we'll look in the list of modules. Hey, the blog module is there now because it installed it through that package reference. I'll add an instance of the blog module to the page. And we can see that it's fully functional. So I can add a title, summary, I can add description, save it, and it created the blog here. And so basically it executed all of the migrations that were necessary as part of the blog. So installed it just like a regular Oqtane module would be installed. But that was all done using just a package reference within the Oqtane application server project. So quite a powerful capability that is new in the Oqtane 6.2 line. And so the other thing I'm going to show you is when we go into module management, we can see that the blog module is installed here, but sometimes you have a lot of modules installed. Like you might have pages of modules, and so you don't always keep track of what's installed. If I go into install a module, this is integrated with the Oqtane Marketplace and tells you all of the different extensions that are available. And in the past, this module wouldn't appeared in the list, and you'd sometimes wonder, like, well, why isn't the blog module appearing, right? I know it's available. I know it's on the marketplace. Well, now it's displayed and it tells you that it's installed instead of just omitting it completely. So that's a new feature that was added to 6.2.1. All right. And the last thing I want to show you is we will go back to this project. We'll go to this My Module project, which creates by default. And we'll grab some code here just to make it simple. All right. So in this module, what I'm going to do is I'll add a button. The button is going to just say show toast. So I'm going to show you the module message capability. And then I'll add an event that will show the toast when the button is clicked. All right, so save that. We'll run it. Maybe click it again. All right. All right, so we'll go back to this. Oh, we got to log in again, sorry. And probably not going to like that. All right, so go to this private page again, and I've got to add an instance of that My module to the page, and we'll add it to the top. All right, so this is the button that I just added for Show Toast, and if I click it, you see that the toast message is displayed down here. So, I mean, this is an alternate capability. Normally, if you had a module message, it would display it at the top of the module above the rest of the module UI. But this is an alternate capability that you can have in your modules if you want to use toast messages. And this doesn't require any third-party UI component library. It's not using RADs, and it's just CSS, right? It's just basic CSS, and it's included as part of the module message component that's part of Oqtane. I guess the trick, which I didn't show you here, is that there's a new parameter. So when you say add module message, you can specify the message style. The default is alert, and it has its toast capability now. All right, so that's, I guess, a lot of different capabilities that are part of the release that I wanted to share. And I will go back now to the slides. So the latest version, of course, 6.2.1 was released September the 29th, so earlier this week, and it was a maintenance release. The next release will be Oqtane 10. And that will be in sort of the beginning of November. And so Oqtane 10 will coincide with .NET 10. So for those who haven't been keeping up, I guess, with .NET 10 RC1 was released in early September with a go live license. So meaning people are running production workloads on .NET 10 already. There's supposed to be a second RC release, and I'm imagining it's going to happen very soon, right? Because it's been almost a month now. So RC2 should be coming out any minute now for .NET 10. The official release date for .NET 10 is November 11th to 14th. That's the same week as .NET Conf, which is typically the event that Microsoft releases .NET at. It's a long-term support release, whereas .NET 9 was a short-term support release. So we definitely want to migrate to .NET 10 as soon as it's available. And so the decision was made in the past to make it simpler to kind of understand which Oqtane version and .NET version is related to one another, that we will synchronize starting with .NET 10, so Oqtane 10 and .NET 10. And there's a number of different, issues that have been fixed in .NET 10. These are just 3 examples. There's a lot of other like minor issues that were fixed in .NET 10, which Oqtane will benefit from. And then usually what we've done in the past is you basically upgrade the framework to the latest version of .NET, make sure that everything works, right? There's no compatibility issues, that there's no compilation exceptions, right? There's no runtime problems. And then once you're confident about that, you look at whether or not it makes sense to integrate some of the new enhancements that are being introduced as part of .NET 10. One of those enhancements is .NET Identity Passkey support, which I think is interesting, and probably because a lot of people who use Oqtane have a group of users, and they're using maybe self-hosted authentication. This passkey support would be quite valuable to them. So I'm considering that would be a valuable feature to integrate if we have the time. And then Oqtane already has like a very robust API, basically like a headless API as part of the framework. And it would be very beneficial to have an MCP server that works with the Oqtane API. And so those are a couple things that I think I would like to try and tackle for Octane 10, but it really is based on like whether there's time to accomplish those things or not. If it's not part of 10.0, then they may come as subsequent releases after 10.0. Octane Marketplace. In the last month, I upgraded the infrastructure that the marketplace runs on to a higher Azure tier because um, basically it's getting a lot of traffic and the database was getting quite full. So I had to upgrade. So there's like, I guess, more capabilities there now in the infrastructure. Um, there's a lot of refactoring, which I touched upon in our last meeting, related to the purchase flow, making it so that installation ID is not required when ordering, um, requiring users to have an actual account with the marketplace. Right now, when you purchase at the marketplace, you don't have to have an account. It's all tied to the email address that you use to make your purchase through Stripe. And so changes related to that, decoupling license creation from the order process. Right now, they're kind of connected to one another. They should be independent, allowing multiple users in an organization to be able to manage the products that are listed, and more license options. So quite a lot of changes that are going to improve the marketplace. And these changes, I'm hoping I can roll out in October. And with that, I guess I'm done all of my talking, and we have some time left for any questions that people might have. So if I go into the chat, if anyone has questions, please go ahead and ask. So I think we have, yeah, there's quite a few people who are in now. Yes, question about multi-tenancy. So multi-tenant installation, do I set up a new theme project for each website? Um, so it depends. I guess it depends on like what you want to do. Um, so you can have, so multi-tenancy, it means different things. And maybe I can shift back to showing my screen here for a moment, but oops. So we'll go back to this project and we'll run it for a moment here so that I can explain some things about multi-tenancy quickly. All right, so if I log into this site as the host user, and we go into the dashboard and we go to site management. So right now, this installation has one site that's part of it, and this site is available at localhost 44329. And then, of course, this could be like a regular domain name if you wanted it to be, but and I can add additional sites. So if I say add site, this will add another site, but by default, if I choose this master database, it means that it's going to create another site within the same database. But this, that means that there'll be two sites that are part of the same installation. And by default, it'll store all the data for the two sites in the same database. I can say create database as well, and I could store all of the information for this second site in its own database. But there still is one instance of Oqtane running, right? So I guess when you're talking about multi-tenancy, it really comes down to how you're going to organize your databases. So what you could do, right, is you could have a whole bunch of sites. You could have like 10 different sites here. And if they are all installed into the master database, then that means that when, regardless of which site I'm in the installation, and if I go into theme management, the themes will be available to any of those sites that are part of that installation. Um, and so you can create one theme and use it across all of the different sites that are part of your installation if that's what you want to do. Or if you wanted to create custom themes for each site, um, you could create distinct themes for like it has the flexibility to do whatever you want, basically. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot of flexibility. So you don't need a new theme project for each website. You can have one theme project and you can share it across. You could have one, similarly, I guess you could have one, Oqtane application and you can put 10 different themes in it and then compile it, run it, and then you could assign one theme to each site. But as far as how you develop, you could have all the themes developed as part of one project. So you've got that capability as well. Um, Question about migration history. Can migration history include a description of each migration? No, it can't, because like if you look at the EF migrations history table that's part of .NET, you'll see that it doesn't include any additional metadata. It just includes the basic version number, the date, and the version of .NET that it was run on. So there is no additional description for migrations that's recorded when you run migrations. Would you suggest migrating existing external modules to the new packaging? I guess it depends on whether or not you think that there are, like, maybe it's too early at this point. Like, we just introduced this new capability. I don't know. It might be useful to find out how much demand there is of people who are creating Oqtane applications, um, and like wait to find out if they would like to install your module as part of a package reference. Because the way that modules were packaged in the past continue to work. They continue to install just fine using the runtime approach. And so the changes that are required to make it work in a build time scenario aren't significant, but I mean, it would require some effort on your part. So you might want to wait until someone specifically asks for your module to be installed in that way before you make those changes. Can the Oqtane application template be deployed with Docker by publishing directly from Visual Studio? Don't know. Please try it. Let me know. Yeah, this is still pretty new. I know that the challenges might not be around the application template. It might be around other things that Oqtane does in terms of interacting with the file system or other things that Docker might have some difficulties with. I don't know. But anyways, that's something that someone's going to have to explore if they are really interested in using Docker. In the future, can we have integration with Solr or other search platform? That is not on the roadmap. Oqtane does have a search capability that's already part of it, that already like can index content across your entire site. It supports the permissions model that's in Oqtane, the multi-tenant nature of Oqtane. So it was built for Oqtane, and to try and integrate some other search technology, I think would involve a lot of work. And so I would suggest you just try to use the search capability that already exists, because it was really, I mean, it's already running in production on some sites with some very large amounts of content, and it works fine. So I'm not sure why it would be necessary to add like a third party integration. to do it. Especially since it's because it's part of Octane, you don't have to pay for it even, right? It's completely free. So whereas like most search functionalities require some kind of a fee. All right. I guess we're at 1 o'clock now. So I appreciate you all joining.